Alright, I'm going to tell you the Russian folk tale of Vasilissa the Beautiful, or at least my retelling of it. A long time ago, in a kingdom far away, in a dense forest within a village, there was a merchant, his wife, and their young daughter Vasilissa. She was known by her parents and the villagers as Vasilissa the Beautiful because she was physically pretty and because she showed kindness toward others. When Vasilissa reached 10 years old, her mother fell gravely ill, and as Vasilissa stood by her bedside, her mother pulled out a small wooden doll and handed it to Vasilissa and told her, "Listen to what I'm going to tell you. This doll is my blessing for you. If you give it a little bit to eat and a little bit to drink, and tell it of your troubles, it will help you solve your problems." And then, after that, when the merchant and Vasilissa were done grieving for her mother's death, the merchant decided that it was time that he found a new wife and someone who would take on the role of a foster mother for Vasilissa. He soon found this woman, or a woman he thought would be a good foster mother for her, and she had 2 daughters of her own. But unfortunately, he was a bad judge of character. The woman was a gaunt, cruel woman who was more interested in the merchant's wealth than being a good mother for Vasilissa. And as Vasilissa grew, she grew more beautiful, and the stepdaughters grew more homely, and this just made the stepfamily very jealous of Vasilissa, so they tried sending her out on difficult tasks and errands that would try to make her sunburned and make her not as beautiful. But the blessing of her mother and the doll helped her. Because every night, before she went to bed, Vasilissa would lock her door and pull out the doll and say, "Eat a little and drink a little of my supper, and please tell me what I should do. My stepfamily wants to drive me from my home, and I don't want to go." And the doll would comfort her and help her with her tasks the next day, so she would not be in any trouble. But eventually, the merchant had to go on a very long trip to a different kingdom. And the stepmother took advantage of this by moving the family far to the edge of the forest they lived near and sending Vasilissa into the dark forest on errands that she hoped she would never return from. This plan didn't work, so she had to think of another plan. One night, the stepmother gave the 3 girls each a task to do. The stepsisters were to knit, and Vasilissa was to spin flax into thread. And the stepmother extinguished all the lights in the house, and they only had a single lighted candle to work by. They worked hours and hours into the evening, and then one of the stepsisters accidentally snuffed the candle. That's the word. And then they were left in the dark. Like, "Oh no!" The sisters cried out, "Oh no, what will we do? That was the last light we had in the house. We'll have to go to the forest with Baba Yaga to get a new light." And the sisters both looked at each other and said, "Well, we have our knitting needles to shine light from, so we don't need to go get light from Baba Yaga. But you, Vasilissa, you only have your flax and thread to spin, and you have no light to shine on your work." So they got up and pushed Vasilissa roughly out the door and locked the door behind her as they cried out, "You cannot come back until you fetch the fire from Baba Yaga." And then Vasilissa was terrified of the forest witch and the idea of meeting her. She compliantly went into the woods, deep, deep into the dark woods, until she found a small clearing. And what was in the clearing made her just stand still and stare. Right mere feet in front of her was a fence made of human limb bones and topped with skulls. And within this fence was a small hovel that was decrepit and stood on 4 enormous chicken legs. Soon the skulls lit up eerily, and the trees began to moan and sway, and then suddenly Baba Yaga flew through the forest toward the house. She cackled wickedly as she landed in the clearing on her flying mortar and pestle, and turned toward her house and said, little house, turn away from the forest and toward me and let me in." And the house obeyed. And soon Baba Yaga sniffed the air and said, "Aha! I smell a small girl here. Who are you?" Vasilissa leaped from where she was hiding in the woods and said, "It is I, Vasilissa, and I have come from my home to ask you for light." "Oh-ho," said Baba Yaga. "Well, I will give you light if you work for me and do my chores, but if you fail, I will eat you for my supper." So then Vasilissa cautiously followed Baba Yaga into her house. And Baba Yaga told her, "Take everything out of my oven so that I might have my supper." And so Vasilissa went toward the oven and pulled out a meal that would feed 5 grown men. And then Baba Yaga dove in and just ate everything up, only leaving some scraps for Vasilissa to eat. As soon as she was filled, Baba Yaga turned to the girl and said, "Listen closely to what I ask for you to do tomorrow. First, you must sweep the house and clean the yard. Then cook my dinner, and finally separate all of the dirt out of my stores of wheat. If you complete this, I will give you a light. Otherwise, I will devour you." And then Baba Yaga crashed onto her bed and began to snore loudly. Vasilissa scurried over to a wall and started the nightly ritual with her doll and told the doll, "I'm at the house of the forest witch Baba Yaga, and if I don't complete these difficult tasks, then she's going to eat me. What should I do, little doll?" Then the doll's eyes lit up with soft light and said, "Sleep, and don't worry, Vasilissa, for everything will be well in the morning." So Vasilissa took the doll's advice and fell into a sound sleep. The girl woke before daybreak the next morning, and as the sun peeked over the trees, Baba Yaga shot out of her house and onto a flying mortar and pestle and flew through the trees. And as soon as Baba Yaga left, Vasilissa rushed out to the backyard to start the cleaning. But as she ran out, she noticed that the house had been swept and the yard had been cleared. And when she went back to the storerooms to start with the wheat, she saw her little doll picking out the last of the dirt from the wheat. And then Vasilissa swooped the doll into her arms and exclaimed, "You've cared for me well, doll. Now I won't have to end here at the house of the evil witch. Now I must only cook her supper." And she spent the rest of the day cooking the witch's supper. And then the trees began to sway and moan, which signaled the arrival of Baba Yaga back to her home. And the witch exclaimed, "Did you do all of the tasks that I assigned for you?" "See for yourself," said the girl. So Baba Yaga closely inspected everything in her house and begrudgingly realized that there was nothing she could complain about. And she gave a disgruntled sigh and said, "Very well, you've done well, but I must ask you, how did you complete all of these tasks in such a little amount of time?" And knowing that her mother's blessing was that if she said anything about her doll, then the magic of her mother's blessing would go away, she instead did not mention the doll, but said, "It is my mother's blessing that protects me." "Bah!" said Baba Yaga. "I don't want anyone with a blessing inside this house. Shoo! Get!" And she thrust a glowing skull into Vasilissa's hands and said, "Take this to your step-family so that they may enjoy its warmth." Vasilissa shot through the forest and grabbed the staff along the way and stuck the skull on top to guide her way home through the dark forest. And as she reached the house, Vasilissa realized that the step-family had probably already found some fire to light the house. But as soon as Vasilissa had left for Baba Yaga's house earlier, an enchantment had been placed upon the house, and that any light was lit inside was immediately snuffed out. So as Vasilissa crossed the fresh threshold into her home and the light was still lit, the stepmother joyfully exclaimed, "Maybe the witch's light will go out," and grabbed the staff from Vasilissa and put it on top of a candle. But then the skull began emitting a harsh red light from its eyes that stared after the stepmother and sisters. No matter where they ran in the house, it continued to shine just on them, back and forth, and it kept growing hotter and hotter and hotter until suddenly, poof, they burst into cinders, and only Vasilissa remained. In the morning, Vasilissa took the skull and buried it deep in the woods, and when she returned home, she realized that her father had returned from his long journey. Vasilissa and her father embraced each other and told each other of the tales that had happened when each had been gone in their absence. And now Vasilissa remained content, had a content life for the rest of her days, and her doll always remained snugly in her pocket.
Yay!